So, interesting article today. Going back to covering some of, well, what's been going on in the fishing industry since Brexit. And I really do think that this article sums it up. And the title says it all. British fishermen were feared that the pro-Brexit campaign would betray them. And of course, they did. Fishing was one of the big core things for certainly the Leave campaign, trying to say, oh my God, look how bad our fishermen are being treated. Oh my God, look how bad, the common fisheries policy is, etc., etc. Except look at what was going on in the EU. You had these regular meetings where, because of UKIP's dominance in the European elections, they were able to put Nigel Farage as the chief chairman into those meetings. He turned up once, didn't even say anything during the meeting, and what happened? Fishermen got absolutely screwed over. The quota system is not dished out totally by the EU. The EU goes, okay, you can have so much, UK, you can have so much, you can have so much, and then it comes down to the government. And it was the government that would then hand out fishing quotas. And one of the big things is, you see, the big arguments, because it was always coming down to this, was the big boats versus the small boats. And the truth is, these small boats, no matter what they say about quota sizes or anything like that, oh, we want bigger quota sizes. Their boats could never, ever physically catch the amount of quota that they were asking for. And there is lots of crazy stuff that go on in the fishing industry of what, like, the scientists were saying, government policy, not EU policy, we're talking UK government policy, and to what crazy promises Farage was, saying about the fishermen could have their golden future, and Brexit would be the revitalization of the fishing industry. Well, guess what? Post-Brexit, they're still getting screwed. And they unfortunately seem to be listening once again to people like Nigel Farage, because he's going to take them for a ride. That's what he does. So my plea is to you guys out there, don't listen to Nigel Farage. Please go find someone else to champion your cause, because I'll tell you now, Farage is not the fisherman's friend. So anyway, we're going to go into this article, because this is just goes to show you the depth of betrayal of how these fishermen were betrayed. And make no mistake, Farage is pretty much responsible for that betrayal as well. So before we go jumping into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So over we go to this today. This is Hakai, the Coastal Science and Societies magazine, with the title of "British Fishermen Feared that Pro-Brexit Campaigners Would Betray Them, and They Did." Few communities in the United Kingdom were as supportive of Brexit as fishermen. Politicians pushing for the country to leave the European Union capitalised on the widespread perception that EU regulators favoured fishermen from the continent over those from the United Kingdom when allocating fishing quotas. They promised that post-Brexit, UK fishermen would have unfettered access to domestic waters. Perhaps unsurprisingly, an estimated 92% of UK fishing communities intended to vote for Brexit in 2016. The fishery deal that was actually struck between the UK and the EU in January of 2021, however, fell far from the vision of UK waters being preserved for UK fishermen. Rather than leading to hundreds of thousands of tons extra for British fishermen, as promised by the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the agreement largely preserved the continental fishermen's access to the United Kingdom's exclusive economic zone. The deal was exonerated by the British fishing organisations. In the new study, scientists have now analysed the vast disparity between the pro-leave campaigners' rhetoric and the post-Brexit reality to show how leaving the European Union has had little or no benefit at all for British fishing communities. And the UK government obviously did not respond to comment for this request because they don't want to comment about it. So, a realpolitik mindset by the European Union is to blame, says Brent Stewart, the study's lead author of the fisheries biologists at the University of York in England. In these negotiations with the European Union, the newly autonomous UK government argued that fishery quotas should be allocated based on where the fish actually live, a principle known as zone of attachment. That would have had decisively favoured British fishermen. Instead, the European Union succeeded in largely preserving the status quo for its fishermen by tying its future of fishing to the passage of an overall deal on trade. The vision of the agreement will now stand until it comes up for renegotiation in 2026. The UK government also went back on its promise made by Victoria Patents, UK minister in charge of fisheries, that EU fishermen would be excluded from the 6 to 12 nautical miles or the 11 to 12 kilometre zone from the British coast. Something like 78% of fishing boats are under 10 metres in the United Kingdom, and they've mostly fishing in that inshore zone, says Stewart. The failure to secure that exclusion, he says, is one of the things from my experience that the fishermen are most upset about. The study estimates that the agreement has resulted in a net increase in catch for UK fishermen of over 170,000 tonnes annually. But because of the way that that increase was appropriated, the gains felt by most British fishermen will be marginal. So, as you can already see, they've actually had a benefit, but they're already upset just on the sheer perception that EU boats are allowed to fish in UK waters. You can see where a lot of this anger is. It's most of it is about perception from the fisherman's perspective, and they don't base their arguments even in reality or what the actual physical nature of the situation is. They've increased their catch since leaving the EU, but the perception from them is nothing has changed and happened. You see that the bizarre situation that we talk about when we come to it, because fishermen themselves in the UK don't really seem to acknowledge the reality of their own industry, which is really, really bizarre. He said they felt very short skewed towards a couple of fish species, says Stewart. Half the gains are in the western mackerel, North Sea herring, and sole. For Barry Dowes, the chief executive of the National Fishermen's Federation organisation, a British fishing industry trade organisation, the deal is a stunning setback. Not was that Des actually particularly surprised by the deal. There was again a strong suspicion, Des says, that the fishing industry would be sacrificed in the larger interest of gaining a final trade deal with the European Union, which was why we spent something like £10,000 on flags which said no fishing sellout, he says. The United Kingdom will have an opportunity to renegotiate its fishing arrangements with the European Union on an annual basis after 2026. And Stewart believes that any push to rearrange the deal to be based on and around zonal attachment is unlikely. If the United Kingdom did follow that route, he says, I could definitely see tariffs and more non-tariff barriers being imposed by the European Union if the United Kingdom really went hard line on this. And it would ultimately, because here's the thing, most of our catch, we've laid this out before, most of the catch that comes from the UK fishermen, 80% of that gets sold on to Europe. We are not a country that eats the amount of fish that British fishermen catch. That's just straight up the case. We just do not eat enough fish. And most of the stuff that British fishermen catch goes and gets sold on into Europe. So all these new trade barriers that they've had to sort of experience and do, they're now having to deal with European red tape. There was one issue of one fisherman that I've read from the what is it, the Fishermen National, their organization. One of their fishermen they were talking about recently has lost up to 60% of his business because having to fill out all that paperwork, all the delays in the border, it's just not worth it anymore for him. So he's lost 60% of his business. And I really do think this comes down to a refusal by these fishermen to acknowledge the reality of where their industry actually is, the changes that are happening in their industry, and the future that really lies before them. They pine, like many of these Brexiteers do, for this golden past that will never, ever really come back. And I think so long as they continue in that fantasy world, they will never be happy. So anyway, we'll finish this off. Like Des Stewart believes, the zonal attachment policy would have probably been the best possible outcome in the negotiation for both sides. Such a framework, after all, would have been better adapted to the changes wrought on the fishing species by climate change, and counting fish, says Stewart, is like counting the trees in a forest, except the trees are invisible and they keep moving around. The future fisheries agreement needs to account for the migration of species to new grounds as the ocean continues to warm, he says, instead of becoming based on which boats fished where over a decade ago. You just can't keep the same system in place indefinitely, Stewart says. It just won't work. And here's the thing, even then, as you said, that in itself, this zonal agreement in itself will have problems, because here's the thing, fish move about, fish are not bound by any, borders or anything like that in the sea. So they will move about however they wish. And climate change will play a big part in that. That's not in dispute. But even fishermen don't seem to accept that if you do that zonal thing, you've got to keep track of where these fish goes, and that is almost in itself next to impossible. And I agree that there needs to be some serious rethinks around sort of a lot of this. And certainly the way in which sort of we approach this. But I definitely think you see a refusal of the reality in which the fishing industry in the UK, and certainly which you see these fishermen in the UK, like to portray their industry. I don't see them being attached to reality. The big change in the fishing industry has been industrialization. The fact that you have had a move from these small boats to the bigger trawlers, that, let's face it, one of these small boats does in a month what one of these big trawlers does in a day. And that's it. They only need to go to sea that one time. And then all the stuff that they catch then moves on into inland, into onshore processing. And that's where the majority now of the UK fishing industry really sits, in those onshore processing centres, not in the actual catching. Because you don't need these small boats going out every day to catch again and again and again. You just have one big boat, does maybe once a month, goes out, does its catch, comes back, offshores it, bish bash bosh, done. And that's the reality of where the industry sits now. But you also have the fact that you've got the WTO. They're really pushing hard now to get rid of, countries to get rid of fishermen subsidies. That's going to be next to impossible, I think, to really achieve, because a lot of countries in the EU have different subsidies to help out their own fishermen. I don't see even these individual countries in the EU doing that and giving that up. And there's going to be lots of challenges for the fishing industry. But one of the big things that we need is that these British fishermen need to probably seriously come back to reality, and really acknowledge the state of where their industry really is in. I mean, you had British fishermen prior to the deal being announced somehow believing that their industry that is worth less than 0.0, like less than 1% really of like the British GDP, that they were somehow going to get massively favorable treatment when we are a service-based industry where 80% of our economy is based on services. You know, that's just the reality of it. And I know that reality might be very harsh for me to say, but you've got to live in the reality of this situation. And there's lots of fishermen out there that we've covered from their quotes, from their videos, don't seem to live in that reality. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.